The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease at 6 in the morning. Emily Carter moved through the narrow space between tables like she had been born doing it. She balanced 4 plates on one arm without spilling a drop, smiled at the man in booth 7 who always complained about his eggs, and refilled coffee cups with a speed that came from 3 years of practice. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a low bun, and her uniform was ironed crisp, even at the start of a double shift. She was pretty in a way that she had never quite noticed, because she had been too busy surviving to spend time looking in mirrors. She set the plates down, tucked the empty tray under her arm, and pulled out her notepad for the next table. A young mother with 2 restless kids. Emily crouched down to the little girl's level and drew a tiny sun on the corner of her order slip, leading it off and handing it to the child. The girl laughed. Emily smiled genuinely and stood back up. That was the thing about Emily Carter. She gave people her full attention, even when her feet ached, and her bank account made her stomach hurt. After her shift ended at noon, she walked 4 blocks to the medical center where her father, Tom Carter, was being treated for a heart condition that had been slowly draining every dollar she earned. The bills were pinned to her refrigerator at home in a neat stack because she believed that if she organized them, they would feel less overwhelming. They did not feel less overwhelming. She squeezed her father's hand, promised him she was fine, and walked back out into the afternoon sun. That was how she ended up answering an ad posted by a staffing agency. Temporary receptionist. Corporate office. Top of Midtown. Excellent hourly rate. Emily had ironed her best blouse and printed her resume on the good paper she had been saving and walked into the office of Whitfield Industries 3 days later. The building was all glass and steel. Rising 50 stories above the street, the lobby was so polished she could see her reflection in the floor. A woman named Gloria from HR handed her a badge, gave her a 2-minute orientation, and pointed her toward the reception desk on the 34th floor before disappearing into an elevator. Emily sat down, straightened the pens on the desk, and prepared to do her job well. She did not know much about James Whitfield, except that his name was on the building. His company dealt in technology, infrastructure, and real estate, and that the staff on her floor spoke his name in hushed voices the way people talk about whether that can ruin your plans without warning. She had read one article about him during her lunch break the day before. He was 38, self-made, and reportedly impossible to work for. The article had called him visionary. The comments underneath had used different words. She saw him for the first time at 2 in the afternoon. He came off the elevator like a man who had never been told to wait for anything in his life. Tall, dark-suited, with shoulders that filled a doorway, and a face that was all sharp lines and controlled expression. He walked past her desk without looking at her. Not rudely exactly, but with the absolute certainty of a man who does not register things that he does not consider important. She might as well have been a potted plant. Emily watched him pass and turned back to her computer screen. Patrick Hale, his attorney, came after him and gave her a polite nod. That was enough for her. She was there to answer phones and manage schedules, not to be noticed by billionaires. The day passed smoothly until 4 in the afternoon when she received a call from the conference room on the 35th floor asking if someone could bring up the Henderson file from the archive on her floor. The regular file clerk had gone home early. Emily located the folder, rode the elevator up, and pushed open the door of the conference room without realizing that the meeting inside was not a casual gathering, but a live board discussion, with 7 senior executives and James Whitfield sitting at the head of the table. She stopped in the doorway. Every face turned toward her. James looked up from his papers. His expression was patient in the way that a man is patient when he is deciding how quickly to dismiss an interruption. The Henderson file, Emily said, keeping her voice level. She crossed the room, set it on the table, and turned to go. She would have made it out cleanly except that one of the executives, a red-faced man named Gerald Foss, said loudly, "Henderson's projections are still weak even with the revised numbers. The East Corridor rollout is going to bleed us dry." Emily paused at the door. She should not have paused. She knew she should not have paused, but she turned around. "Excuse me," she said, and every eyebrow in the room went up. I am so sorry to interrupt, but the Henderson East Corridor issue is actually a routing problem, not a revenue problem. If you reroute the distribution through the secondary grid points, you cut operational costs by roughly 18%. There was a case study published by a firm in Atlanta last year that documented the same structural issue. Silence. She had gone too far. She pressed her lips together and walked out. Closing the door quietly behind her, she spent the next 10 minutes at her desk, convinced she was about to be asked to leave the building. Her heart was hammering. She had no idea what had possessed her. Her father always said that she had never learned to keep a good idea to herself. The door of the conference room opened 40 minutes later, and the men filed out. Gerald Foss walked past her desk and said nothing. Patrick Hale stopped and looked at her with something close to amusement. And then James Whitfield came out last, and this time he looked directly at her, not past her. At her, his eyes were dark gray, she noticed, the kind of gray that looks like a storm that has not decided whether to break yet. He said nothing. He walked to the elevator, and the doors closed behind him. Emily exhaled and went back to answering phones. But James Whitfield did not stop thinking about her. That was the part she did not know. He asked Patrick that evening who she was. Patrick told him. Temp receptionist. Staffing agency. Had been there for days. James sat with that information for a long time. He called up her personnel file from HR before he went to bed that night, something he had never done for a temp employee in his life. He read it twice. Then he closed his laptop and poured himself a drink and stood at his office. Window looking down at the city, he was not a man who liked surprises. He had built his entire life on controlling variables, on reading people quickly and reducing them to their function so he could move efficiently through the world. Women were the same. He was not cruel. He simply did not invest. He met women at events, dated briefly, kept things uncomplicated. His last serious relationship had ended for years ago in a way he did not allow himself to think about. Emily. Carter was a temp receptionist who read distribution case studies during her lunch break and spoke up in board meetings like she had every right to be there. She was a surprise. He decided to handle her the way he handled everything inconvenient. He would observe, assess, and neutralize. He went back to the office the next morning and walked past her desk with the same indifference as before, except that this time it was deliberate. She looked up briefly and went back to her work. She was wearing the same crisp blouse as the day before. Her desk was neat. She had brought her own small plant from somewhere and set it. In the corner of the reception space, he found that irritating. Over the following week, he found many things about her irritating. She hummed quietly when she thought no one was nearby. She remembered the names of every person who came off the elevator and greeted them by name after meeting them once. She ate her lunch at her desk, but always finished exactly 30 minutes later, as if she were rationing her own time. She never looked at him with admiration or nervousness, the way people usually did, which meant she was either indifferent to him or extraordinarily disciplined. He could not decide which one bothered him more. On the Friday of her second week, she stayed late to finish filing a backlog that the regular staff had left behind. The floor was empty by 7. James had been in his office working when he walked out to get a document from the printer and found her still at her desk, under a small lamp, organizing folders with the same quiet focus she gave everything. "You should have gone home hours ago," he said. It came out sharper than he intended. She looked up without flinching. "I wanted to finish. Your shift ended at 6. "I know when my shift ended." He stood there a beat longer than necessary. "You do not get overtime pay for unauthorized hours." "I am not doing it for overtime pay," she said simply, and turned back to her work. He stood in the hallway outside his office for a long moment, the document in his hand. Feeling something shift in his chest that he could not name, he named it arrogance on purpose. He told himself she was performing, that she wanted to be noticed, that it was a calculated move. He went back into his office and sat down and opened his laptop and stared at the screen for 20 minutes without reading a word on it. On Monday, she came in and someone had left a fruit basket on the reception desk with a card that had no name on it. He saw her open the card, read it, look around the empty floor with a small, confused frown, and then set the basket aside and start her morning as if it had not. Patrick found James watching from the hall and raised one eyebrow. James walked away without a word. The kiss happened on a Wednesday. He had not planned it. That was what he would tell himself afterward, though the truth was more complicated than that. He had been planning something, a power move, a way to remind himself that she was just a variable and he was the one in control of the equation. He had been watching her confidence grow every day, watching her laugh with the junior staff, watching her quietly command a space that technically belonged to him, and something in him had needed to assert itself. She had been working late again. He had come out of his office and walked to her desk and said something cutting. Something about how her presence on the floor was temporary and she should not get comfortable. And she had stood up and looked at him without any of the fear he expected. "I know exactly how temporary I am," she said. "That does not change how I do my job." She said it without anger, without pleading, with a steadiness that was more powerful than any argument. And in the quiet of the empty floor, with the city lit up behind her through the glass, James Whitfield did something he had never done in his professional life. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was hard and brief and tasted like arrogance. A domination move. A way of putting the world back in the order he understood. What he did not expect was the sharp, clean sound of her palm connecting with his cheek. She did not yell. She did not cry. She picked up her bag from the bottom drawer of the desk, looked at him with eyes that were burning but completely controlled, and said, "If you do that again, I will not slap you. I will call your legal team, your board, and every journalist who has ever written about you. And then I will walk out that door, and you will never have to pretend I do not exist again." The doors opened. She stepped inside and they closed. James stood in the empty reception area with a stinging cheek and a silence so total he could hear his own heartbeat. He touched his face. He had kissed women as a conquest before. It had always worked. It had always left him feeling in control. He did not feel in control. He felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like he had just made the worst mistake of his life in, could not decide yet whether it was the kiss itself or the fact that he already wanted to apologize for it. Emily Carter did not sleep well that night. She lay on her narrow bed in her small apartment with the ceiling fan turning slow circles above her and replayed the moment over and over the way. You replay a car accident? Not because you want to, but because your mind refuses to let it go. She pressed her fingers to her lips. They still felt warm from something she refused to call anything other than an assault of arrogance. She was not going to romanticize it. She was not going to soften it into something it was not. What she was going to do was decide whether to go back. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. Her father's medical bills were stacked on the kitchen counter. The temp agency had been clear that this placement paid nearly double what most positions did. She had 3 more weeks left on the contract. Walking away meant calling the agency and starting over. And starting over meant a gap that her budget could not absorb right now. She sat up in bed at 2 in the morning and made her decision the same way she made every hard decision in her life. By asking herself what Tom Carter would say, her father, even sick, even tired, would have squared his shoulders and said that no man's bad behavior gets to take food off your table.
Ow.
But you do not let him take your dignity either. You go back with your head high, and you dare him to try again. She ironed her blouse in the morning and went back. James Whitfield arrived on the 34th floor at 8:45 and stopped walking when he saw her at the reception desk. She was on the phone, nodding, writing something in her notepad. She did not look up at him. She did not avoid looking up at him either. She simply had not finished her call yet, so she finished her call. And by the time she set the phone down, he had already walked past her toward his office. He stopped once, briefly with his hand on his doorframe. She was already answering a second call. He went inside and closed the door. Patrick Hale arrived 20 minutes later and stopped at her desk with his usual polite nod. She smiled at him and handed him a folder he had apparently been looking for since Thursday. He blinked at it. She told him it had been misfiled under the wrong client code and she had corrected it during the backlog sort. He thanked her with genuine warmth and disappeared down the hall. Inside his office, James heard none of this, but he saw it through the narrow glass panel beside his door. He saw Patrick's surprised expression and Emily's calm efficiency and the easy way the two of them interacted, and he felt something sharp and unwelcome move through his chest. He told himself it was annoyance. He drafted an email to Gloria in HR that morning asking about the possibility of transitioning the temp role to a different placement. He read it over 3 times and did not send it. He was not going to do that. He was not going to punish her for being the only person in recent memory who had refused to let him get away with something. He deleted the email and opened his calendar instead. What followed was a cold war conducted in the language of professional silence. He passed her desk without speaking. She managed his floor's operations without requiring his input. He had expected her presence to become awkward, to develop the kind of crackling discomfort that forces one person out. Instead, she moved through the days with an ease that was almost irritating in how genuine it appeared. She was not performing indifference. She simply had her work to do, and she did it. It was Donna Harper who noticed first. Donna was Emily's closest friend, a fellow waitress from the diner who called every evening to hear about the corporate world with the enthusiasm of someone watching a reality show. Emily told her about the floor, the executives, the strange rituals of people who had more money than they knew how to carry. She did not tell Donna about the kiss, not because she was protecting James, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a way that she was not ready for yet. She sounds stressed. Donna said on Thursday evening, "I am fine. You only say you are fine when you are the opposite of fine, and I am the opposite of fine," Emily admitted, pulling her knees to her chest on the couch. "The man is impossible, Donna. He walks around like the air belongs to him, like gravity is doing him a personal favor by keeping him on the ground. Is he awful looking? That is completely irrelevant." "So yes," Donna said, and Emily could hear her smiling. "Good night, Donna." She hung up and sat in the quiet of her apartment and admitted to herself, in the privacy of her own thoughts where no one could hold it against her, that James Whitfield was not awful looking. He was the kind of man whose face was difficult to stop thinking about, which was exactly the problem. Meanwhile, something had shifted in James that he could not shake loose. He had always been deliberate about information. He used it the way other people used money, accumulating it, organizing it, spending it only when it would produce a return. But the information he was gathering about Emily Carter now had no strategic value, and he knew it. He knew she took the subway to work and walked the last 4 blocks regardless of weather. He knew she had a habit of leaving a single sticky note on the corner of her monitor each morning with a single task written on it, crossing it off only when it was completely finished before writing the next one. He knew she had been at her father's medical center twice in the past 10 days, because Patrick had mentioned seeing her there once, and James had quietly confirmed the second visit through a building sign-in log that he absolutely should not have been looking at. He told himself he was assessing a variable. He was doing nothing of the sort. On the second Friday of his Cold War, he did something that surprised even himself. He contacted an anonymous charitable medical assistance fund that he had established years ago for exactly 0 personal reasons and made a specific allocation. He did not attach Emily's name to anything. He simply ensured that a family matching a certain profile in a specific medical center would find that a portion of their outstanding balance had been cleared by an anonymous donor. He poured a drink afterward and sat at his window and felt something uncomfortably close to peace. Patrick found out. Patrick always found out. He appeared in James's office the following Monday with 2 coffees and the expression of a man choosing his words with surgical care. "The Henderson East Corridor. Proposal you dismissed last week, Patrick," began. "I did not dismiss it. I asked for revision. The revision came back. The routing solution that was suggested during the meeting has been implemented in the preliminary model." Patrick set one of the coffees on the desk. "It works. Gerald Foss is now calling it his idea." James picked up the coffee. "Is that what you came in here to tell me?" "No," Patrick said, sitting down across from him. I came in here because Celeste Monroe called me this morning. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Celeste Monroe was the kind of woman who appeared in society, photographs, and smiled with her whole face while doing damage with the quiet efficiency of a trained professional. She and James had a history that was more political than personal, the kind of connection maintained because both parties found it useful. She had apparently been monitoring the temp staff situation on the 34th floor through a contact in HR, which was exactly the kind of thing Celeste would do because she monitored everything that moved near James Whitfield. She is concerned, Patrick said carefully, about the level of access a temporary employee has to the executive floor. Temp manages reception on the executive floor. That is the role. She used the phrase unvetted influence. James set his coffee down. She used that phrase about a woman who answers phones and files documents. She used that phrase, Patrick repeated, about a woman who walks into board meetings and tells senior executives how to fix their distribution models and happens to be the only person on this floor who does not treat you like a force of nature. The silence between them lasted a long time. Tell Celeste I appreciate her concern, James said. Patrick stood up and to mind her own business, in whatever language she prefers. Patrick allowed himself a small smile and left. But Celeste did not simply go away. She appeared at a benefit dinner James attended that Saturday night in a silver gown that was calculated to the last detail. She found him near the bar and touched his arm and said in her practiced low voice that she worried about him, that she had heard things about the reception girl, that someone so clearly out of her depth in that environment was bound to cause disruptions. James looked at her for a moment. Her name is Emily Carter, he said, and she has caused exactly 0 disruptions. He moved away from the bar and did not speak to Celeste again that evening. The forced partnership came the following week. James had been scheduled to lead a presentation to the City Planning Committee about a major infrastructure project Whitfield Industries was bidding on. The presentation required compiling 2 years of data from multiple departments into a single cohesive report. His executive assistant, a meticulous man named Howard, had been handling it, and then Howard's wife went into early labor, and Howard was gone for 2 weeks on emergency family leave, and the report was due in 9 days. Patrick looked at the situation and then looked down the hall at the reception desk and made a suggestion that James rejected immediately, reconsidered quietly, and eventually accepted in the way that a man accepts something he had already decided to do, but needed a moment to pretend otherwise. He walked to her desk himself. She looked up. I have a project, he said. It requires someone who can organize complex data sets and translate them into a clear narrative. Patrick tells me you have an engineering background. I have 2 years of an engineering degree, she said. I had to stop. He did not ask why. He could guess. Can you do the work? She held his gaze for a steady beat. Yes. You will have full access to the relevant files. The deadline is non-negotiable. I need the draft by next Friday morning. Understood. He nodded and walked back to his office. He heard her chair move as she got up to begin. What neither of them had anticipated was how completely the work erased the distance between them. They met each afternoon in the small conference room adjacent to his office. She came with printed summaries covered in handwritten notes in the margins. He came with questions that were precise and demanding. She answered every one of them without hesitation. And when she disagreed with his framing, she said so directly and explained why. And twice she was right, and he told her so, which surprised her enough that she looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her before. On the 4th afternoon, she was working through a section about community impact projections, and she paused over a column of numbers with her pen hovering above the page and said, almost to herself, this assumes the relocation of existing residents is a footnote. It is not a footnote. James looked up from his laptop. Say that again? She looked at him. These numbers count displaced families as a cost variable. But if your project is going to get public approval, you need the committee to see them as stakeholders, not line items. Change the framing, and you change the whole argument. He stared at her for a moment. Then he opened a new document. Start from the beginning, he said. Tell me exactly how you would frame it. They worked until 9 that night. At some point, someone had ordered food, and it was sitting between them on the conference table, and neither of them remembered asking for it. She was talking about a community survey structure, and her hands were moving the way they did when she was excited about an idea, and he was watching her with his chin resting on his fist, and he realized with a quiet, alarming clarity that he had not thought about the company in the last 2 hours. He had only been thinking about her voice. She stopped mid-sentence. "You were not writing any of this down. I have a good memory." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "That is a convenient thing to say." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was close enough that she noticed, and when she noticed, she looked back at her notes quickly. That was the night Patrick had quietly told Emily something he felt she had a right to know. Not everything, not the original detail of the bet, but enough. He told her that James had not always been this sealed off. That there had been a woman 4 years ago named Rachel who had been the only person James had ever spoken of in terms that suggested a future. And that Rachel had left not because she stopped caring, but because she had been offered something by a rival of James's. A business arrangement that included painting James as a man incapable of real partnership. And the betrayal had been so complete and so coldly calculated that James had simply closed a door inside himself and told no one how much it had cost him. Emily sat with that information on the subway home. She turned it over slowly, the way you turn a stone and look at what is living underneath it. She was not ready to excuse anything, but she was beginning to understand the architecture of the man she was working with. The way you begin to understand a building by learning what it was built to withstand. On Thursday evening, the night before the report was due, they were finishing the final section. The floor was completely empty. The city spread out behind the glass in its usual indifferent beauty. She had taken off her shoes under the table the way she sometimes did when she forgot to care about being professional. And her pen was moving across the last page, and without looking up, she said, "Why did you come back that morning after what you did?" The room went very still. James set down his pen. He did not pretend he did not know what she was asking. He looked at the table for a moment, and then at her. "I told myself it was because you were too competent to replace quickly," he said. "That is a good story." "It was a lie," he said quietly. She looked up then. His face in the low light of the conference room was open in a way she had never seen it. The sharpness was still there, but underneath it something else was visible. Something that looked like the particular exhaustion of a man who has been holding himself very tightly for a very long time. "I came back," he said, "because watching you walk into that elevator was the first time in years that something felt like a consequence. Like something I actually had to answer for." She held his gaze. Her heartbeat was doing something she refused to analyze. "That is a better story," she said finally. "Also true." She looked back at the page. Her pen moved again. But her hand was not entirely steady, and she knew that he could see that. And she also knew, with the particular clarity that arrives at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night in an empty building, that the war she had been fighting was no longer only with him. The report was finished at 10:27. She capped her pen, stacked the pages, and stood up. He stood too, and for one moment, they were simply two people standing on opposite sides of a table with the whole complicated truth of the past weeks between them. Not as a wall, but as a map. "Good night, Mr. Whitfield," she said. "James," he said. She picked up her bag. At the door, she paused for just a second with her hand on the frame. It's the same way he had paused at his own door on the first morning she had come back. She did not turn around. "Good night, James," she said, and walked out into the hall. He stood alone in the conference room with his hands in his pockets and the finished report on the table, and a feeling expanding in his chest that had no professional name and no safe category and no exit. And he thought, with the first real fear he had felt in 4 years, that he was in very serious trouble. The presentation to the City Planning Committee went better than anyone expected. James delivered the report with his usual command. But it was the community stakeholder framework, Emily's framing, that turned the room. 3 committee members who had been openly skeptical leaned forward when that section appeared on the screen. One of them, a woman with 20 years of public service behind her eyes, said it was the first infrastructure proposal she had read in a decade that treated people like people, James accepted the praise without correcting who deserved it. But that evening, he had Patrick send a formal recommendation letter to the staffing agency, citing Emily Carter's exceptional contribution to a major. He did not tell her he had done it. She found out anyway. Gloria from HR mentioned it casually, assuming Emily already knew. Emily sat at her desk for a full minute after Gloria walked away, looking at nothing in particular. And then she straightened her monitor and went back to work. The following Monday, a man named Gregory Sloan came to the 34th floor. He was the head of talent acquisition at Pinnacle Tech, a fast-growing firm 3 blocks away. And he had apparently tracked Emily through the staffing agency after seeing her name attached to a community impact model that had begun circulating quietly among city planners who found it unusually thoughtful. He was charming and direct. He sat at the small chair beside her reception. Desk like it was a perfectly normal place to have a recruitment conversation, and offered her a full-time senior analyst position with a salary. That made her grip the edge of her desk too. Keep her face composed. She told him she would think about it. She spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about it and trying very hard not to think about it at the same time. The numbers were undeniable. The role was everything she had been working toward before life had redirected her into diner aprons and temp contracts. It had health benefits that would help with her father's situation in ways that an anonymous donation, however kind, could not sustain indefinitely. She had not known about that donation yet, but she felt the strange, unexplained lightening of her father's billing situation as a gift from somewhere she could not locate. She did not see James for the rest of that day, but James had seen Gregory Sloan arrive. He had watched through the narrow glass panel beside his door with his jaw set in a hard line and his coffee growing cold in his hand. He did not know exactly what was said, but he understood the body language with perfect fluency. The way Sloan leaned forward with that particular energy of a man making an offer. The way Emily listened with her full attention and her expression carefully neutral. The way she straightened in her chair at whatever number he named. He told himself it was none of his business. He said that to himself 4 times between noon and 3 in the afternoon. By 4 o'clock, he was cold in a way that the people on his floor immediately registered without understanding it. Howard, who had returned from family leave that morning with a sleepless glow and a new respect for the word chaos, gave James a wide berth. Patrick took one look at him before their afternoon meeting and made a note to ask questions later. Emily felt the shift the moment she passed him in the hallway near the printer. He did not stop. He did not speak. But the temperature dropped 3 degrees when he walked by, and she knew. With the instinct she had developed over the past weeks, like a kind of weather sense, that he knew about Sloan. She did not owe him an explanation. She reminded herself of that clearly. She was a temporary employee with 11 days left on her contract, and she had every right to plan her future without consulting the man who had kissed her as an act of corporate arrogance. She reminded herself of that again on the subway home, and again while she made dinner, and a third time while she lay awake at midnight listening to the fan turn. Patrick came to find her the next morning before the rest of the floor filled up. He brought 2 coffees, which told her this was not an accidental conversation. He sat across from her desk and held his cup in both hands and looked at her with the expression of a man who had been deciding how honest to be and had finally landed on completely. He told her about the bet. He told her carefully and without drama, the way Patrick did everything. He explained that it had started as a calculation, that James had made an arrogant wager about seducing her into surrendering her company, and that it had collapsed almost immediately under the weight of who she actually was. He told her that James had canceled the bet privately and never collected, that every hostile move against her company had stopped, not because of the dinner arrangement, but because James had ordered it stopped before that dinner even happened. He told her that the anonymous medical fund allocation had been James, and he said it plainly because Emily deserved to know the full picture, both the darkness and what had grown in it. She sat very still through all of it. When Patrick finished, she picked up her coffee and took a slow sip and set it back down. Long have you known? She asked. About the bet? From the beginning and the rest of it. Patrick looked at her steadily. The rest of it, I have been watching happen in real time. She nodded once. She thanked him. He left. She sat at her desk for 20 minutes without answering a single phone call, which was so unlike her that Howard came over to check if the phone system was broken. She told him she was taking a short break. He retreated immediately. By the time she stood up, she had organized everything she felt into something she could carry and walk with. The anger was real, and she did not diminish it. The gratitude about her father's bills was complicated, and she did not simplify it. And underneath both of those things, something else sat quietly and would not be. Reasoned away, she knocked on his office door. He said, "Come in." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. He was at his desk, and he looked up. Whatever he saw on her face made him put his pen down and give her his complete attention in a way that cost him something. She could tell. "You made a bet about me," she said. Not a question. The muscle in his jaw moved. "Yes. You plan to use me. To take what I cared about?" "Yes." "And then you changed your mind?" "Yes." She walked to the chair across from his desk, but did not sit. She stood behind it with her hands resting on the back of it and looked at him directly. "I need you to understand something, James. My company is not something I have. It is something I am. And my dignity is not a variable in your calculations. It is not a line item. It is not a footnote." "I know that," he said. His voice was quiet. "Do you?" Because the man who kissed me in that hallway did not know it. Stood up. He came around the desk and stopped a few feet from her, and he did not try to close the remaining distance. He stood there and let her look at him, which she realized took more courage from him than anything she had seen him do. "The man who kissed you in that hallway," he said slowly, "was the worst version of himself, doing the only thing he knew how to do when something frightened him." "And what frightened him?" "You did," he said simply. "Everything about you. The way you stood in that board meeting, like you had every right to be there. The way you came back the next morning after what I did. Not with fear and not with anger, just with your head up and your work in your hands. I did not know what to do with someone I could not categorize." She held his gaze. "So you tried to own me instead?" "Yes," he said. "And I have been ashamed of it every day since." The room was very quiet. Outside the glass, the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday. Morning completely indifferent to what was happening on the 34th floor. "Gregory Sloane offered me a job," she said. Something moved across his face. It was not the cold arrogance she had seen in the early weeks. It was rawer than that, and he did not try to cover it. "I know," he said. "It is a good offer. I know that too." Waited. He breathed in slowly. "I am not going to tell you not to take it," he said. "I have no right to tell you that. But I am going to tell you something else." He took one step toward her, then stopped himself. "I have spent 4 years making sure nothing could reach me. Building things and acquiring things and never once letting any of it mean anything beyond the deal. And then you walked into a conference room you were not supposed to be in and told a room full of overpaid men exactly how to fix their problem. And something in me woke up that I had been paying considerable effort to keep asleep." Emily felt her grip on the chair back tighten slightly. "I am aware of that. I am better at strategy than honesty, and better at control than vulnerability, and I have spent a considerable portion of the past month making your professional life difficult, while also secretly trying to protect you from a threat you did not know existed, which I understand is not a coherent position." Despite everything, she felt the faintest pull at the corner of her mouth. "It is not a coherent position," she agreed. "I want to be better at it," he said. "At this, whatever this is, I am not asking you to forgive everything immediately. I am not asking you to choose me over a legitimate opportunity that you have earned. I am asking you for the chance to show you that the man in this office is not only the one who stood in that hallway." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about her father squeezing her hand in the medical center. She thought about Donna on the phone asking questions she did not know how to answer. She thought about the conference room at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night and the way the room had felt smaller in a way that was not uncomfortable. "The gala," she said. He blinked. What? Whitfield Industries has a charity gala this Friday. Patrick mentioned it last week. Yes. I want you to tell the truth there, she said. Not about the bet. You do not owe anyone that story but me, and you have already told it. I want you to introduce me as someone who contributed to the Henderson Project, by name. To the people in that room who will know exactly what that means for someone in my position. He did not hesitate. Done. She released the back of the chair. And I want a real conversation about the stakeholder framework being credited properly in the final submission to the city. I will have Patrick draw up a formal acknowledgement today, she nodded slowly. Then she looked at him with something that was not forgiveness yet. Not entirely, but was the honest shape of what came before forgiveness. When two people decided that the truth between them was worth more than thee. Distance. I have not decided about Sloane's offer, she said. I know I might take it. I know that too. And if I do, she said, that will not be the end of the conversation. He looked at her, and the storm gray of his eyes settled into something steadier and deeper. No, he said, it will not. She walked to the door. With her hand on the handle, she paused, same as she always did, same as had become their unspoken language. And this time she did turn around. You paid my father's hospital bills, she said. He said nothing. James. Yes, he said quietly. She looked at him for a beat that stretched wide and warm between them. Thank you, she said. Just that, just those two words. And they carried everything she was not yet ready to say in full. She opened the door and went back to her desk. The gala, on Friday, was held in the grand ballroom of a hotel that cost more per night than Emily made in a month. She wore the same black dress she had worn to what she thought of as the funeral dinner, but this time it did not feel like armor. It felt like simply what she was wearing. Donna had insisted on lending her a pair of earrings that caught the light when she moved, and Emily had accepted them without argument for once. She arrived without knowing exactly what to expect. James found her within 10 minutes of her, walking through the door. He was in a dark suit that fit the way only things made specifically for a person fit, and he crossed the room with the same decisive stride she had watched for weeks. Except that this time it was aimed at her without pretense. He brought her into the first conversation with the deliberate ease of a man who had decided exactly what he was doing. The group included 2 city council members, a prominent architect and Gerald Foss, who looked mildly alarmed to see her. You will remember the community stakeholder model in the Henderson submission, James said to the group. That framework was Emily Carter's work. She built it from the ground up in 4 days, while simultaneously managing the entire executive floor. The city planning committee called it the most human infrastructure argument they had read in a decade. The architect, a warm-faced woman named Patricia, turned to Emily with genuine interest. Gerald Foss said something about having had a feeling the model showed fresh thinking. Emily smiled at him with the perfect politeness of a woman who has decided that some battles are not worth the energy. Celeste Monroe appeared at the edge of the group 20 minutes later, like a weather system that had been tracking them. She looked at Emily with a smile that did not move above her cheekbones and said, Something about it being lovely to see support staff at these events, James said. Without looking at Celeste, Emily is not support staff. She is the reason the Henderson Project has a real shot at approval. He turned to Emily. Can I get you another drink? Celeste excused herself shortly afterward. Later in the evening they stood together, near the tall windows at the edge of the room, slightly apart from the crowd. She had a glass of wine, and he had his usual something amber over ice, and the city was visible below them through the glass, familiar and indifferent. You did not have to do all of that, she said. Yes, I did, he said simply. She looked at him sideways. You are better at honesty than you claim to be. You make it easier, he said, which I did not expect and am still adjusting to. She smiled, a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. He watched it happen with an expression that was unguarded in a way she suspected very few people had ever been allowed to see. I called Sloane this afternoon, she said. He went very still. I told him I needed another week to decide. She turned to face him more fully. I wanted to see who you were on Friday night before I made up my mind. And she considered him. All of him. The sharpness and the softness underneath it. The arrogance and the shame it had produced. The man who had tried to own her, and the man who had stood in his office and let her see him clearly without flinching from what she found. I think, she said carefully, that you are someone worth the risk of knowing better. He set his glass down on the windowsill. He turned to face her fully, and the rest of the room fell away the way it always did when they were close enough to speak honestly. I want to know you better, he said. Not your work, not your usefulness, not what you could be to my company, you, the woman who draws sons on. Children's order slips at 6 in the morning and humiliates board members with a rooting solution and comes back to a job after. Someone behaves unforgivably because her integrity is bigger than her anger. She felt something loosen in her chest that she had been holding tightly since the first morning she had come back to the desk. That is a lot to know, she said. Softly, I have time, he said, and standing there at the edge of the room with the whole complicated, honest truth of it between them. Not as a wound, but as a beginning. Emily Carter decided that some risks are not reckless. Some risks are simply the shape that courage takes. When it finally meets something worth being brave for, she did not say yes to everything that night. She was not that kind of woman, and she would not start being that kind of woman for anyone. Not even for a man who was looking at her like she was the first real thing he had seen in years. But she said, ask me to dinner. A real one. No strategy. No agenda. And James Whitfield, who had built an empire on knowing exactly what to say in every room, stood quietly for a moment and smiled. A slow and genuine and slightly stunned smile, and said, Tomorrow night? Tomorrow night, she said. She turned back to the window, and they stood together watching the city below them. Two people standing at the beginning of something that had no guaranteed outcome and no controlled variables and no safe exit, which is the only honest way that anything real ever starts. Outside the glass, the city carried on, indifferent and luminous, doing what cities do, holding 10,000 stories at once without favoring any of them. But in that window, reflected back against the night, two people stood close enough that their reflections overlapped, and neither of them moved away, and that was enough. That was, in fact, everything.
As this story comes to a close, it leaves behind something more than just entertainment. Stories like this often mirror the complicated emotions people face in real life: love, pride, misunderstanding, ambition, and sometimes regret. When powerful personalities collide, even the smallest movement can lead to consequences no one expected. But now the story belongs to you as much as it belongs to the characters. What did you think about the choices they made? Do you believe the ending was fair? Or would you have handled the situation differently if you were in their place? Every viewer brings a different perspective, and your thoughts might reveal a side of the story others never considered. I had really liked to hear your opinion, so take a moment and share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story kept you engaged or made you reflect on relationships and life decisions, please take a second to press the like button. It's a simple way to support the channel and helps this story reach more viewers who enjoy emotional storytelling. And if you are someone who enjoys powerful stories about billionaires, CEOs, and the complicated world of human emotions, make sure you subscribe. New stories are shared regularly here, each one designed to surprise you, move you, and sometimes even challenge the way you see certain situations. You can also help the channel grow by sharing this channel and sharing this story with someone. who enjoys dramatic storytelling. Thank you for watching and for being the part of storytelling journey.